Welcome, everyone. It's good to see you all. We've got about T-minus 45 seconds to start, so glad to have you join us. Philip, it's so good to see you. I haven't seen you in a while. Good to see you.
Great to see you as well, Christine.
Gwen Mason, how are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much. Good to see everybody. And hello, Megan Field, my long lost comrade and colleague from Senator Kaine's office in days gone by.
Gwen, what a treat. How are you?
Oh, well, great to see you, Megan. Good to see everybody in the Hill City as well.
Going to be a nice old reunion for a couple people, I see. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. Well, welcome, everyone. I have the appointed hour, so since you all are punctual and my speakers are here, we're going to reward punctuality. So welcome everyone to Wednesdays at 1. This is our two-part series on the legalization of marijuana in Virginia, and we're pleased to have both Brad Copenhaver and Megan Field here with us today, and I'm going to introduce them in just a minute. Just a couple quick things. First of all, just want to welcome everyone. It's good to see your faces. I know I've seen some of you. We're now out and about actually in public, and I can't believe we still know how to interact after a year of sheltering in place. So it's good that so many of us are able to get out and see each other. We have quite a few in-person events coming up. I'll talk a little bit about those at the end, but please go on lynchburgregion.org to see the full list of both our virtual offerings like this, as well as our in-person events that resume in June. I will say today is part, as I mentioned, today is part 1 of a 2-part series. Next Wednesday at 1, we will have the legalization of marijuana part 2. And we're pleased to have with us next week Tim Heaton, and he is the president of the Colorado Advanced Manufacturing Association. And he's going to share with us lessons learned from the very first state that legalized marijuana and what employers and industries might want to think about as we roll out this new legislation. So tune into that. If you haven't registered, please go ahead and register for that. But let's go ahead and get started. We've got lots of information to share today. This is recorded, so if you have colleagues that missed today and you would like the recording, please do reach out to us and let us know. We'll be happy to get you that. You can reach out to me or Ryan Weeks, our Director of Communication, for a recording. But we are pleased to have Brad Copenhaver with us, and Brad's got a brand new title as of last week. We were referring to him as the Deputy Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry, and as of last week, he has been named the Commissioner of the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Brad, we're so delighted to have you. Gosh, your background in the field of farming and ag is pretty deep, and I'll tell you just a little bit about Brad. Prior to the Deputy Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry, he has done so much. He grew up on his family's beef cattle and Burley tobacco farm. He worked on Capitol Hill as a legislative correspondent for Congressman Morgan Griffith. He was Director of Government Affairs at the Virginia Agribusiness Council. He was a Pamplin Scholar at Virginia Tech and graduated with degrees in political science and agriculture economics and completed his MBA from the University of Washington. And I was delighted to read that you were president of the Virginia 4-H, which is an organization I was part of for years. Many of you all know him from his role as Deputy Secretary, where he led Northam's administration's legislative efforts for what we're going to talk about today. But he also maintained the federal produce safety compliance and helped Virginia's Chesapeake Bay cleanup commitments with regard to urban fertilizer application. So Brad, welcome. Before I turn it over to you, I'll just introduce your colleague who's with us today because you guys are tag teaming. We are also pleased to have Megan Field, who is a policy advisor. She worked in the offices of United States Senator Tim Kaine and the Speaker of the Virginia House of Delegates, Eileen Fillercorn. She has litigated in numerous areas, including evictions, consumer protection, criminal justice, and open government. She has her bachelor's degree from St. John's College and a Juris Doctorate from Harvard Law School, where she completed over 900 hours of pro bono service, which says she is a complete advocate for the citizens of Virginia. So Megan, we're so glad to have you with us today. Thank you for being here. And without further ado, Brad, we've asked you to kind of walk through and unpack this legislation that goes into effect July 1. And then we're going to open it up to all of you that are on the phone today. Any questions that you all have about implementation of this legislation and how your organization navigates through it. So Brad, welcome.
Thank you. It is so great to be here. First, want to just ask, can everyone hear me? Okay, I'm using my phone audio. Great. Thank you so much for that introduction. And I want to say a thank you as well to my colleague, Megan Field, for joining me today. I have done quite a few of these updates in the last year or so since we've been working on this. And I am now transitioned into a new role. Today is actually my first official day on the job as VDAC's commissioner. So this is my very first Zoom event as VDAC's commissioner, and so I couldn't think of a better group to be with on my first day. So I really appreciate it. But want to say Megan has really been leading this work along with me, and I think is going to continue to be a leader in this space. And so I'm very excited that she was able to join the call today, and she'll be available to help answer questions as we get into the question and answer period. And then moving forward, I think Megan is going to be a great point person as you all continue to work on this. And for really, I think this is going to be a long-term endeavor for the Commonwealth moving forward. Also want to say hello to my friend Gwen Mason. Gwen, it's been too long since we've seen each other. It feels like forever. I feel like the last time we saw each other was probably up in Harrisonburg at the Rural Summit that we were at. So good to see you, and it's good to see my friend John Putney and lots of other folks. You all are such a great group, and when John called me a couple months ago and asked me to set this up, I jumped at the opportunity. So honestly, I'll say when I started my job as deputy secretary, I had no inkling that marijuana legalization would be one of the things that I worked on. I thought we would be sticking pretty strictly to agriculture and forestry issues, but marijuana cultivation, cannabis cultivation is an agricultural issue. We do also work on industrial hemp here at VDAC's, and that's something that I had a lot of experience with. And so back in last session, the 2020 session, the General Assembly asked for two separate reports on the path to marijuana legalization, not really making recommendations whether Virginia should or should not legalize, but if we were going to go down that path, what would that look like? And so one of those reports was conducted by JLARC, the the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission, which is a mouthful, so JLARC. And then also one was directed for the governor and actually four secretaries: Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary of Finance, Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security, and the Secretary of Health and Human Resources. So jointly, over the last year, those four secretaries put together a work group, which met a total of 15 times over the last year, all virtually during the pandemic, and came up with a report at the end of it. It was almost 500 pages, so if you ever want some light reading as you're drifting off to sleep, you can read our marijuana report. But it laid out kind of how Virginia would need to go about legalizing marijuana if we wanted to do so, looking at other states who have gone that route. So both of these reports really found that Virginia could see significant economic development opportunities from legalizing marijuana. So just to give some numbers here to you, the JLARC report found that the industry could create around 11,000 to 18,000 jobs over the next 5 years. The report also found that Virginia could collect up to $308 million in tax revenue annually by the 5th year of implementation. So we're talking some pretty big numbers in that regard. Our work group report, which VEDP actually helped us run some modeling for this and get some numbers, found that the industry itself statewide could have an economic impact of up to $1.2 billion, billion with a B. And I think that's really in line with what a lot of other states who have legalized cannabis for adult use are seeing as well. Both of these reports also found, and this is very important because this is a kind of a thread that will weave throughout this entire endeavor, but it found that Black Virginians are actually more than 3 times as likely than white Virginians to be arrested for marijuana crimes. We know that historically, the war on drugs and marijuana prohibition has disproportionately impacted Black Virginians more than white Virginians, and one of the key pieces of this legislation is actually several planks in social equity for this new endeavor as well. So Governor Northam, after we released this report, expressed his support for adult use cannabis back in November, and then he proposed legislation to the General Assembly in January. And Megan and I worked very closely with the General Assembly. We had a dozen hearings, countless hours of testimony, many weeks of debate, lots of robust discussion in the General Assembly, but we came out with a comprehensive bill to legalize the possession, sale, and adult use of cannabis past the General Assembly. The governor recommended several amendments to that bill, which were approved by the General Assembly at its reconvened session last month. And these amendments included moving the date up for legal simple possession up to July 1st of this year. So as of July 1st, you will be allowed to have up to 1 ounce of marijuana for your own personal use. And also personal cultivation for up to 4 plants per household. That's not per person, but per household, also for personal use, and then also speeding up some of the provisions related to sealing records. So I want to spend some time today going over some of the highlights of this new law, keeping in mind that there are several dates that we're thinking about here. The first is that July 1st date that I mentioned, where many of the law's provisions take effect, and then also looking down the road to summer of 2023 and also January of 2024, and then also keeping in mind that several portions of this bill, of this new law, have to be reenacted by next year's General Assembly in order to take effect. And so I'll walk through all of that. So first of all, the law as it stands gives Virginia a fairly long runway for getting marijuana legalization underway. Again, the bill legalizes simple possession as of July 1st of this year, but the regulatory structure that would allow for sales will not take effect for a couple more years, and those sales will not begin until January 1st, 2024, again, assuming that everything is reenacted. So the portions of the bill must be passed again in the 2022 sessions. So as I discuss all these provisions, one helpful way to think about that, in general, items having to do with the regulatory structure of the new industry, including licensing, taxation, product requirements, those are all going to be subject to reenactment. Most of the criminal provisions are not subject to reenactment. So that's not always true, but that's a helpful way to think about it. And the primary reason for this long runway is that the General Assembly decided to create a brand new state agency, which is going to be known as the Virginia Cannabis Control Authority, or the CCA, and that this new agency will oversee the entire adult use cannabis industry and then also including our existing pharmaceutical processors, our medical marijuana program as well. So it's going to take some time for this new entity to get off the ground. It will have a board and a CEO that are appointed by the governor, and then it's going to need to find office space and hire staff and do all of the administrative work that takes to establish a state agency. And these are all things that we have started working on. Megan is really leading that effort from the governor's office, and so we're working on those appointments right now. And here is the perfect time to give a plug for our board appointments. We are looking for qualified folks for each of the 3 boards actually that the new law creates. And so any information about those can be found on the Secretary of the Commonwealth's webpage. And then I'll ask Megan. Megan, is our cannabis website up yet? I think we're planning to have that up by mid-June if it's not up already.
We're close. It should be up by mid-June, like Brad said, but not quite there yet.
Okay, so mid-June, look for cannabis.virginia.gov, and that will have everything in one place, and we'll start pointing people there as well. So after the agency is established, it's going to be responsible for developing and implementing the actual regulations to set up the industry and administer the program. And this is going to take at least a year to go through the regulatory process. There is a shortened kind of a regulatory process, not subject to the APA that the General Assembly is allowing for this to be expedited a bit, but it's still going to take some time. And then after that, the CCA must go through the process of issuing licenses to businesses. The businesses will have to take time to establish themselves and grow the first crop. So we're talking many months after that as well, products having to be processed and then get out onto the shelves in the new retail establishments as well. So according to the legislation, the industry structure will consist of 5 different license categories: cultivation, retail, processing, wholesale and distribution, and laboratories. And labs must be separate, totally independent from all the other sectors. And for the most part, in this law, vertical integration is not allowed. That the labs being totally separate third party, no financial stake in any of the other sectors, that's a best practice that has really emerged nationwide from all the other states who have legalized marijuana. That's something that we brought to Virginia as well. The bill does, in terms of vertical integration not being allowed generally, the bill does allow for certain micro businesses and also pharmaceutical processors and hemp processors to vertically integrate. Again, the details of that are still a little bit fuzzy and will be worked out over the next couple of years. So the bill includes caps. I call it the bill, the new law now. I guess parts of it these parts have to be reenacted though. But it includes caps on every section of the industry supply chain. And the CCA will also be able to control these caps. And what we want to do is make sure that we're matching supply with demand. I'll give you an example of a state that didn't do this very well, and that's Oregon, which has now had an adult use program for some years. But back at the beginning, they awarded way too many cultivation licenses to support for that demand would support, and their prices plummeted. And many people lost their businesses, and things did not go very well. And so states are also always very careful and want to make sure that we're setting, since it's such a closely, tightly regulated business, and all products must remain in state for us to comply with federal law. We want to make sure that we're putting caps on those. So 400 retail stores, 25 wholesalers, 60 processors, and 450 cultivators as well. And again, the CCA will kind of ratchet those up as the industry grows, and then also the General Assembly, as it considers this again next year, will have another chance to look at that again. Furthermore, the bill also provides that there must be a geographic dispersion of the licenses. Also requires that products must be tracked seed to sale throughout the entire supply chain. That's also something that's very important for us to maintain federal compliance and not have any product crossing state lines. And then again, all that must be reenacted next session. One other topic that was pretty hotly debated during the General Assembly is local control. How much local control will be available for this new industry? The legislation, as passed, the new law sets up a system very similar to what we now have for alcohol. So retail sales will be permitted in all localities as kind of the default option, but individual localities can opt out of allowing retail sales via a referendum if they so choose, and the bill outlines what that process will look like. And then furthermore, localities maintain their local land use authority with regard to where marijuana businesses can operate. And so that's something that was discussed a lot in the General Assembly, and leaving localities with their existing authority was something that the General Assembly decided was very important to do. Legislature also heavily debated whether to allow for personal cultivation of cannabis, and again decided for adults of 21 years of age to have up to 4 plants per household for personal use. Again, that starts this July, just a couple months away. It's important to note also that there are some labeling and placement requirements for people who will grow it at home, and it will also not be legal to sell any of that product that is grown at home. In order to protect public health, this is the second board that I mentioned. In order to protect public health, there's a Cannabis Public Health Advisory Council that is also created that will advise the Cannabis Control Authority and will also have veto power over all CCA regulations that have to do with public health. So that's one of those boards that we are also in the process of appointing. There's testing, packaging, and labeling requirements, pretty stringent requirements that will be fleshed out again via the regulatory process for products. And there are also per serving and per package limits on the amount of THC. And in terms of child protection, there are robust restrictions on advertising to prevent targeting of children. There are packaging requirements and labeling requirements, all meant to protect children and not let these products get into the hands of children as well. Furthermore, this is something where Virginia is a big leader, I think. This is something that we heard in our work group from public health folks that we talked to, but the legislation sets up a way for Virginia to collect robust data about public health issues related to marijuana, and also provides a funding source for both substance use prevention and treatment for public health campaigns. And so to my knowledge, to our knowledge, no other state has taken the step actually of setting up a data collection regime in cannabis legalization, especially before the product is actually legal and available for sale. And so over the next couple of years, before these products hit the shelves, we'll be able to collect a lot of data about use rates and other public health issues. And then as it becomes available for sale and as the law changes in the future, we'll have that baseline to compare all the policy decisions to. And I think that will help policymakers down the road decide better decide how to make decisions around marijuana. So one question that we get a lot, and also something that was talked about a lot in the General Assembly, is how the revenues will be dispersed. You know, I mentioned over $300 billion likely to be collected by the 5th year in revenues for the state. So the bill is very specific, or the law is very specific about how these revenues will be dispersed. So 40% will go to early childhood education for at-risk 3- and 4-year-olds. 30% will go to the new Cannabis Equity Reinvestment Fund, which I'll talk about here in just a second. And 25% will go to substance use prevention and treatment, 5% to other public health priorities. Big focus on public health there as well. So to get into some of the equity provisions, like I mentioned before, we are very proud that this law focuses on undoing the harms of criminalization and focuses on social equity. So like I mentioned, Black Virginians have really borne the brunt of the negative impacts of Virginia's prohibition on cannabis. And we want to begin the process with this law of making those communities whole again. So one of the ways that we aim to do this is the Cannabis Equity Reinvestment Fund, and that, again, that gets 30% of the annual revenues. So this new fund will be overseen by a board of community leaders. Again, we're in the process of appointing this board, so if you have ideas for folks to serve on this or would like to serve on it yourself, let us know. And this board is going to have a few different goals. The first is supporting persons, families, and communities historically and disproportionately targeted and affected by drug enforcement, providing scholarship opportunities and educational and vocational resources for historically marginalized persons, including persons in foster care who have been adversely impacted by substance use individually, in their families, or in their communities. So really broad goal there. Awarding grants to support workforce development, mentoring programs, job training and placement services, apprenticeships, and reentry services that serve persons and communities historically and disproportionately targeted by drug enforcement. Also contributing to the Virginia Indigent Defense Commission and to the Virginia Cannabis Equity Business Loan Fund. So that Cannabis Equity Business Loan Fund, so we didn't want to just, when we were setting this up, we wanted to make sure that we were creating pathways for people from these communities who have been disproportionately harmed by cannabis prohibition, finding ways for them to get engaged and be involved in the new industry. One of the ways that we know that there are barriers to entry in this industry is access to capital, especially since our financial institutions so far are not able to really engage in the program. Let me see, I've got a question here. The name of that support group, so that's called the Cannabis Equity Reinvestment Fund. Cannabis Equity Reinvestment Fund or Cannabis Equity Reinvestment Board will be the name of the board. So some money will be set aside to a Cannabis Equity Business Loan Fund, which will provide low and no interest loans to social equity qualified applicants to establish cannabis businesses. This program is going to partner with Community Development Financial Institution, a CDFI in the state, to get this funding out to businesses. And again, a lot of the details of that still to be worked out as the Cannabis Control Authority comes on board, and the General Assembly will have to consider many pieces of this again next year, but that's the idea. So as for who qualifies as a social equity applicant, who would qualify to get one of those loans, the legislation sets out a few different ways for someone to qualify. So the first is an applicant with at least 66% ownership. We wanted these to be owners in reality, not just on paper. Ownership by a person or persons who have themselves been convicted or adjudicated delinquent for any marijuana offenses, or who is the parent, child, sibling, or spouse of a person who meets that requirement, or an applicant with at least 66% ownership of a person who has resided for at least 3 of the last 5 years. We want to make sure it's people that are actually living in these communities in a jurisdiction that is determined by the board after using census tract data to have been disproportionately policed for marijuana crimes, and then also a person who has lived for the last three of the last 5 years in one of the areas as determined by the board that is economically distressed. So that could be urban areas or rural areas. Both urban and rural can meet any of these requirements. And then also an applicant with at least 66% ownership by a person who has graduated from an HBCU located in the Commonwealth, a historically Black college or university. So any type of business, farmers, retailers, manufacturers, can benefit from these programs as long as they meet the social equity criteria. And again, the process for that and the application will be fleshed out a little bit more. And we know that it's going to be complicated and it's going to be complex filling out these applications to get a license. So one other thing that the law does is sets up a cannabis business equity support team within the new agency to help qualified applicants go through this licensing process, and then also through the process of actually setting up and running a business. A lot of people who are interested, who may be entrepreneurial minded, may not have the experience of actually starting and running a business. And so we have this team that will help these applicants kind of go through that process and actually go through the process of writing a business plan and thinking about how to set up a business as well. We also try to be really thoughtful about other requirements that may hinder the ability for some of these applicants to become licensed and operational. For example, we did not have a requirement in the bill, explicitly not in the bill, to rent or own property before becoming licensed. That's a big upfront capital investment to either rent or own property before you even know if you're going to get a license to run your business. And so that's something that we wanted to include as well. And so finally, I've talked a lot about the new agency and kind of the business side of things. Very briefly say that the law makes a number of changes as well to Virginia's criminal code. Again, the most significant of these is that on July 1st, 2021, it's been about just over a month, simple possession will no longer be illegal. That means that adults 21 and over can have up to 1 ounce, so long as they don't have an intent to distribute the marijuana. So in conclusion, now that this is passed and is being enacted, our team has a lot of work to do, again, over the coming weeks and months, including all of those appointments and getting the new agency set up, implementing other parts of the legislation, including the regulatory process, that data collection piece that I mentioned, and others. And we're really looking forward to continuing to engage with stakeholders moving forward. In my new role at VDAX, I will continue to be working on this. VDAX has some very specific roles laid out, even though this is going to a different agency, a brand new agency. VDAX will help some with the regulatory process with regard to cannabis cultivation. VDAX will also have a role to play in the regulatory process for cannabis edible products. So we'll continue to be very engaged moving forward. But that's the extent of my presentation. That was a lot of information, and in a couple of weeks we'll have a website that we can send to you all and point you in the direction there. But I would be happy to take any questions, and Megan is here as well to take questions as she really transitions to I mean, she's already leading this work, but transitions away from me being there as well, and takes even more of this load. So thanks again, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Brad. We will open it up. I am monitoring the chat. Feel free to type a question there, or you are welcome to raise your hand and I will call on you and you can take yourself off mute. One question, Brad, as we start. You mentioned this new equity oversight group and support group that will help with these small businesses starting up. You know, one of the things we hear, you know, we house our local small business development center for this region in our office, and we also work closely with the supplier diversity and small business network in Virginia. Will there be any braiding or any integration, or like if someone comes to us about this business, will they be able to get the resources they need through those existing resources, or will it be another layer, another department, another application that they'll have to go through? Has there been any consideration for how those organizations will be integrated and can work together?
I would say we haven't had that in-depth of discussions yet, but I'm glad that you brought that up. And I would say as we set up this new agency and have that team coming on board, any ways that we can integrate and make it as seamless as possible, so people aren't having, I mean, that's one of the biggest headaches, is going from agency to agency. Yep. or you never know where to turn. So any way that we can make that as seamless as possible would be great. And then I'll see if Megan has anything to add there, but we're still working on developing that.
No, you know, the only thing I'd add is just to highlight something Brad has already said, which is that most of the regulatory licensing portions of the bill have to be reenacted by next year's General Assembly. So while I can't say what appetite there is for making massive changes or not, we'll see. But there's certainly, you know, the next 6-7 months is a great time to be in touch with legislators because they have to come back and take a look at those portions of the bill. So just wanted to encourage folks to be in touch with their legislators if they're, ideas like this or others that they'd like to see during next year's reenactment.
Thank you, Megan. That's helpful. We certainly can do that. I know that's one of the frustrations is, gosh, they have to go to 4 or 5 different places, and we're trying to eliminate the red tape of doing that. So that'd be helpful. Thank you, Megan. There's a question in the chat. Manufacturers are concerned about being able to test for marijuana use among their employees. What advice do you have for them?
Great question. So the law does not change anything with regard to employment law or employers' rights with regard to marijuana use. We know that there really are some jobs, some industries where impairment is a really critical issue. And so actually we did not touch that section of Virginia's code at all. And I'm sure that discussions about that will continue in the future. I know that there are some new technologies that are maybe on the horizon. We've been hearing that for a long time, though, and nothing has quite panned out yet. But for measuring impairment, but that's kind of an evolving conversation, and not just one that's happening in Virginia. That's really a nationwide conversation as well.
Yeah. So in other words, whatever you currently are doing in terms of drug use policy is still in effect and does not necessarily, this law does not change your ability to adhere to your policies.
That's right.
Currently, right? So another question, how will federal laws around marijuana businesses and the handling of money in the national banking system override anything that the General Assembly passes?
That's a great question. And I would say that is probably the number one challenge that we're starting to realize right now. So there are myriad federal laws that do kind of override Virginia law with regard to financial institutions. Our financial institutions, especially those that are FDIC, have to adhere to certain things and are not able, really are legally not able to bank marijuana businesses. And so businesses in other states have had to become really creative. Some of them have found success working with state chartered institutions like state chartered credit unions, for example. We did include a carve out in this bill, kind of a safe harbor provision in our financial institution law, basically saying that if a Virginia chartered financial institution wants to bank marijuana, they are not breaking any Virginia laws. Again, the problem is really on the federal level. And so Governor Northam recently joined a letter with several other governors nationwide encouraging Congress to pass the Safe Banking Act, which would clear up most of these issues. And it has passed with really some significant bipartisan support, passed the House of Representatives and is awaiting consideration in the Senate. And so we are hopeful to see that as well. And thank Senator Kaine. I see again Gwen on here. Thanks Senator Kaine for his support on that as well. Megan, anything to add there?
I think she's good. Megan, anything? No?
Yeah, the only thing to add is just to echo that, we're as much in the dark as everyone else is. We get this question all the time, and I wish we had some insight and we knew what was coming down the road, but we truly don't. So I can tell you that on the governor's team who's thinking about this, we're keeping a close eye on it, and there's lots of thinking about how the licensing and regulatory and social equity programs in Virginia will exist once interstate commerce is allowed. But there's, I think there's a sense that it will be allowed eventually at some point, but who knows when. So I wish we had clearer answers.
Thanks. This question it doesn't come up on the chat, but it's come up in my conversations over the past couple weeks with our healthcare providers and our addiction recovery advocates and groups that are an integral part of our community. As you all know, opioid addiction is a challenge. Drug overdose is a challenge. The mental health and psychiatric departments are seeing a rise in this. What I know there was much debate over reconciling abuse versus production and legalization. Can you give a little bit of the behind the scenes of how you guys reconcile that? And I know you talked about going into these neighborhoods and really helping, but for those that are really trying to help those in the community that have been a victim of addiction or substance abuse in their families, can you talk a little bit about how those conversations were had on the state level?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wish we had Katie Finley here from Secretary Kerry's office. She would be she would really be the best person to answer this. But I can give you some thoughts, and maybe Megan will have something to add. And then if we need a little bit more, I'm sure Katie can follow up too. That is something that has been a priority for us from the very beginning. That's something that was a priority. Was one of the key tenets of our marijuana legalization work group over the last year. For Governor Northam, as a physician himself, that was very important for us to consider. And what we tried to do is look at practices, kind of best practices, emerging best practices nationwide for how to legalize this product thoughtfully and safely. So the first thing is all the labeling and testing and those requirements that I talked about. Also, limits on the amount of THC, which is a psychoactive chemical compound that gets you high in cannabis. So limits per serving and per package in that. I know some other states have seen products that have just astronomically high amounts of THC, but we'll have per serving and per package limits on that. And that is something, all these things are things that the cannabis, the Health Advisory Board will be weighing in on very heavily, and something that we thought was not in our original bill, but we thought was a great idea from the General Assembly, was giving that board veto power over all regulations that come out of the Cannabis Control Authority having to do with health and safety. And what we really want to do is thoughtfully ensure that the products that we're putting out there are not going to really lead to more addiction. Although we know that will likely happen, and that there will be people that need additional treatment options. And so we have included, again, that funding for drug abuse prevention and treatment options, and we're also starting. We're going to have some statewide campaigns about kind of responsible cannabis use, and then also all the protections for children as well. I would say if you look at Virginia's law compared to all the other states that have come before us, we have really taken all those. I would say we come from a very good place, because not being the very first state to do this, we have seen what other states have done that has worked well, and what hasn't. We're able to take all those learnings and put them into our law, especially with regard to public health. So Megan, anything else that I missed there? And if you want more, we can pull in Katie.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just add, to keep an eye again on as implementation happens over the next 3 years, the various education state agencies are pulling together plans for age appropriate education in K through 12 and also for college age. The Cannabis Control Authority itself is going to implement a safe driving and safe use awareness campaign next year. So Brad is absolutely right that, the executive work group last year centered public health and involved health professionals. And, I just can't say enough that Governor Northam, not only as a doctor, but as a pediatrician, this is something that we've heard from him just over and over again, that we need to make sure that we are listening to health professionals, that they're going to be in the room, that we're learning from other states. And also going forward, as Brad mentioned during his presentation, 25% of the tax revenue is going to be going directly into substance abuse and treatment programs. So, this could be, it's going to be tens of millions of dollars to benefit substance abuse prevention and treatment programs for the state. And that won't be limited to marijuana, so it could be a real benefit for regions of the state that are struggling with the opioid epidemic or other addiction issues.
Thank you, Megan. Another question in the chat: how are the regulations of limits handled and regulated for personal cultivation and growth?
I think I'm going to pass that off to Megan if she doesn't mind. I think she's more qualified to address that one.
Sure, lots of interest in this question. So Brad mentioned it's 4 plants per household, not per person. So if you have 20 roommates, it's still only 4 plants. It's something we saw folks in Michigan sort of skirting the rules. So in addition, your plants need to be out of sight of the public. They need to be out of reach of people under the age of 21. And you need to label each plant with a tag that has your name, your driver's license or ID number, and something noting that it's for personal use. So the last thing to note here is that Virginia's possession with intent to distribute laws are going to remain in place. So it is not legal for you to sell or distribute in any way the plants that you choose to grow at home.
Okay, so all of you that are thinking this is your enterprise, there are your specifications. I know for me, just putting your driver's license number on there would be a deal breaker for me. So, okay, so another question has come through on a text. Could you walk us through some of the worker protection provisions that it looks like the Virginia Cannabis Control Authority Board will be in charge of? Can you give us some specifics on those provisions? Or where to find specifics?
I may also pass that one off to Megan if that's referring to the worker protection kind of labor peace language that was included in there.
Yeah, I will. I have to dig up what the code section is, and I'm happy to do that in just a minute or afterwards and get back in touch. There is a section of the bill that allows the Cannabis Control Authority, which is, the EBC equivalent for cannabis, to deny a license to a business if they interfere with workers' efforts to unionize, if they aren't paying prevailing wages, or if they label a certain percentage of employees as independent contractors. But it's really important to note that this part of the bill has to be reenacted. So unless next year's General Assembly passes the same thing, it will not become law. So once we all sign off and we're done, I'm happy to look up the code section and I'll share it to be distributed.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think, you keep saying that. I think it's really important to note that 2021 is the year where everything gets passed and starts that integration, right? But then 2022, everything has to be solidified, if you will. So just remember that, those that are on the call. Another question in the chat: will the state advise localities on best practices related to zoning and land use for cannabis-related facilities once they come online in 2024, given the equity factors?
That's a great question, Philip, and that's actually not one that I've gotten so far. So you're making me think. I think that would be a good idea for the state to consider, and that's something that we can share with the new Cannabis Control Authority and the new board and staff as they get on board. I think it's always helpful, even as localities retain their authority, for there to be a set of guidelines or kind of best practices out there, so that business owners know what to expect from locality to locality. And so that is definitely something that we can talk more about as we roll this out.
Maybe you just got a new potential prospect for your Cannabis Authority Board. That's what I heard.
There we go.
Okay, I don't see any other questions coming through on chat. I don't have any on text. I'm not sure about Facebook. I don't think I see any there. So if there are no future questions or additional questions, I will just say, first of all, thank you, Brad and Megan. I know you guys are so busy working on this this new law and getting things ready for July 1. We appreciate your time. I'm sure if we have follow-up questions from anybody that's on the call today, if you'll send those to us. Many of you all know John Putney, our Director of Government Relations. Feel free to send him or me an email, and we'll do our best to get you the answers you need. I will remind you that next week we are doing part 2. We will talk to Colorado and get lessons learned, best practices, and some specifics for industries and how they navigated some of those things that have come up even on today's call. So join us next Wednesday at 1 o'clock to hear from Tim Eaton, the president of the Colorado Advanced Manufacturing Association. Lots of other upcoming events. Please go to lynchburgregion.org for those. If you all need anything, as always, we are your concierge for commerce. Anything we can do to help you, please don't hesitate to reach out. Without any further questions, I just gave you 10 minutes of your day back because we were scheduled till 2. So, I mean, y'all got 10 minutes. I mean, you can solve the world's problems. So good to see everyone. Gwen, and I see Aaron Van Allen joined us. Thank you guys for all you do on the federal level. We just appreciate everyone working together and coming together. So y'all have a great afternoon and a happy, safe Memorial Day.
Hey, Brad. Hey, this is Matt Ferris. Did you hear me?
Oh,
Matt, welcome, Matt.
Hey, Brad, you still on?
Yes.
I am.
I just want to tell you congratulations, and really good to hear your presentation today too. Tell your dad and your brother Craig I said hi.
Will do.
When you talk to them. But one little quick question: has it been any work done, or I'm sure it's been thought about, on with workers' comp insurance, as far as with how this might affect employers and the workers' comp insurance, what the regulations will look like
That's
now?
a good. Yeah, that's a. First of all, thanks, Matt. Thanks for the congratulations, and we'll definitely share your hellos, and hopefully I'll get to see you in person sometime in the near future. That's a great question, and I don't think that we have fully fleshed that out yet. So that'll be something for you all and others moving forward to consider. But that's a good question. I think that's a huge deal, and I don't think we had the time or the bandwidth to cover that one this session.
No, you're exactly right. Now, I know this is something we'll work on for a long time if I'm able to stay in the General Assembly. But I appreciate all your hard work that you've done with this, and knowing you and your family makes me feel better that you will continue to. I hope you will continue to work on this, because it's certainly something that's going to affect a lot of businesses.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And I'm looking forward to continuing to work on this, and it's great to hear from you.
Yeah, man. Take care.
Good to have you, Matt. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for inviting me, and I'll try to catch up next Wednesday.
All right. Well, everyone else, you're welcome to stay on and you got any other questions, otherwise we're gonna sign off. Bye, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you,
Thank
Megan.
It was good.
Thanks,
We
John.
appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.